I would love to hear from you just any any stories, any evidence you have of soldiers just opening up their hearts to what it meant to them to come back to the United States and to be treated so horribly.
I should say this was a difficult book to write for that reason. To read these stories, to listen to the oral history interviews of Black veterans, and the utter disrespect they encountered when they returned to the country. Stories Black veterans shared was that when they got back to the country, there weren't parades for them. In fact, when they got off ships, they were directed to go to the Black-only section of town. Right, that they immediately came back to segregation. They were, in some cases, threatened and attacked while still wearing their military uniforms. In the book, I recount that at least 12 Black World War II veterans were killed in the years immediately after the war, in part because they were starting to fight for civil rights, and that the communities they came back to, the white communities, didn't want anything to do with that. They wanted to maintain the status quo in the racial hierarchy. And I think what's inspiring about the stories of these Black veterans is that they didn't give up, that they were truly fighting for America, not only in the military sense, but fighting for the country to be a better version of itself, to actually have real freedom and democracy for everyone in the United States. And I hope more than anything with the book that I've tried to do justice to the service of these Black veterans, because they truly are, if we're going to use the term the greatest generation, I think they truly are members of the greatest generation. One of the stories that stuck with me was an oral history interview with a man named Robert P. Madison. He was a member of the 92nd Infantry Division who fought in Italy. He earned a Purple Heart in combat there. After the war, he comes back, he uses the GI Bill to earn architectural degrees from Case Western and from Harvard University. He ends up opening a pioneering architectural firm in Cleveland, Ohio. In his 70s or 80s, he goes to a bookstore, and he's telling the story. He says he goes to a bookstore, goes to the great shelf of books on World War II. He takes a book off the shelf, this great big book, flips through it, and sees no reference at all to the work of Black soldiers during the war. And his quote, which stuck with me, he said, "We were a forgotten group of people." And I think for us today, when we think back to World War II, it's too easy, particularly for white Americans, it's too easy to think about that time being a period of racial unity, when somehow the country was more united than we are today. But the reality is that just isn't true. During World War II, the United States was deeply divided in terms of race. In 1943, there were more than 240 race riots or racial clashes all across the country. And so I think we think about the relevance of this history today. We need to understand that America has been trying to reckon with this history of racism and racial discrimination for decades and decades. And we have to include World War II as part of that story.